Imagine facing down an NFL linebacker. Now picture a version custom built for the Ice Age. Shorter, stockier, denser bones, and packed with enough raw muscle to hunt Ice Age megafauna at terrifyingly close range. Meet the Neanderthal. They were the living tanks of the prehistoric world. Meanwhile, early Homo sapiens, our ancestors, we were just these lanky, fragile wanderers barely stepping out of Africa. If you look at the raw survival stats, they should have won. They should be the ones ruling the planet right now, and we should be the dusty fossils sitting in their museums. But history took a hard left turn. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals vanished. Completely. So how does a physically perfect species just get wiped out? Let's strip away the flesh. If you put a Neanderthal skeleton right next to an early Homo sapiens, the difference is exactly like parking an armored Hummer right next to a Prius hybrid. Thick bones, a massive barrel chest, short, stocky limbs. Every single trait on this body, from the structure of the skull down to the skeletal frame, was engineered by nature for one sole purpose: surviving the Ice Age. They weren't born to run grueling marathons like sapiens, packed with fast-twitch muscle fibers. Neanderthals weren't endurance runners, they were sprinters, ambush machines built to burst out and take down prey in a flash. But in evolution, no superpower is free. Every biological advantage comes with a receipt, and Neanderthals had to pay one of the most expensive energy bills in human history. Beneath that massive chest was a high-capacity lung system to pump oxygen into all that dense muscle. Think back to that gas-guzzling Hummer. The Neanderthal body was powerful, but it was incredibly expensive. While our lanky sapiens ancestors could survive lean times on a modest amount of calories, a Neanderthal needed to consume massive amounts of meat every single day just to keep their biological machine from shutting down. And to pay off that massive energy bill, they were forced into the most dangerous hunting style imaginable. The fossil record shows that Neanderthal right arm bones are consistently asymmetrical, proving they endured immense repetitive stress. Why? Because while sapiens wisely chose to throw spears from a safe distance, Neanderthals were masters of close-quarters combat. Using the dense forest for cover, they'd leap out to ambush, thrusting spears directly into giant beasts. This violently up-close hunting style worked perfectly in the thick Ice Age forests. These were bloody, hand-to-hand death matches that left their skeletons covered in fracture patterns comparable to modern professional rodeo riders. But the payoff? It was absolutely massive. If you grew up on cartoons and pop culture, you already know the stereotype. The dumb caveman, hunched over, dragging a wooden club, grunting gibberish, with an IQ just slightly higher than a rock. But modern science just threw a bucket of ice water on that entire idea. Crack open that massive skull and you'll find a brain that was actually bigger than ours. These weren't mindless apes. They mastered fire. They crafted highly complex stone tools. They even boiled down pine pitch to make industrial-grade glue for their weapons. But to really understand who the Neanderthals were, we can't just look at the sharpness of their spears. We have to look at something much deeper. Follow archaeologists into a cave in Shanidar, Iraq. Down in the dirt, they found a skeleton. Researchers call him Shanidar 1. The marks on his bones tell a brutal story. A crushing blow to the skull that left him blind in one eye. His right arm was shattered, withered away, and eventually amputated. He had a crippled leg. And he was almost completely deaf. Stop and think about that for a second. In the ruthless, predatory world of the Ice Age, a blind, deaf, one-armed, crippled hunter shouldn't have lasted a week. It was an absolute death sentence. But Shanidar 1 didn't die. No. Bone analysis shows he lived with those crippling injuries for years, surviving well into his 40s or 50s. That is a staggering old age for a Neanderthal. How is that even possible? The answer shatters everything we thought we knew about them. He wasn't left behind. By every rule of nature, Shanidar 1 should have died. His skeleton proves he was completely dependent on others. Surviving for that long meant someone was feeding him. Someone was protecting him from predators. Someone looked at a hunter who could no longer hunt and decided his life still mattered. And this is exactly where the mystery of their extinction gets so much darker and so much more tragic. We realize they weren't stupid. They weren't cold-blooded monsters. They had deep family bonds and profound compassion just like us. So, if they were built like armored tanks, had bigger brains, and were bound together by unconditional love, then what on earth actually wiped them out? Everything started coming undone about 50,000 years ago. Modern science has proven that the Neanderthal extinction wasn't a single event. They weren't wiped out overnight. Their disappearance was a perfect storm, a series of brutal survival pressures crashing down all at once, tearing right through their armor. We can break this collapse down into 4 fatal cracks. 1. The battlefield changed. A brutal climate shift known as MIS3 hit, sending European weather into wild swings. Those dense forests, the absolute perfect cover for Neanderthal ambush tactics, they started dying off, replaced by massive, barren, freezing steppes. Out on the open plains, prey could spot these massive tanks from miles away. Their sprinting advantage, suddenly completely useless. 2. A body, too expensive to keep. As the environment shifted and hunts kept failing, their biological machines, burning up to 5,000 calories a day, started running on empty. And right while these giants were starving, around 45,000 years ago, our Homo sapiens ancestors officially poured into Europe. In a time of extreme scarcity, that lanky, fragile Prius body of the sapiens turned out to be a survival masterpiece. It simply needed less fuel. 3. The power of distance and invisible threats. Sapiens didn't just burn fewer calories, they brought highly adaptable hunting strategies. Our ancestors developed lighter projectile weapons. They didn't have to gamble their lives in bloody wrestling matches with apex predators. More and more, distance became a weapon. Sapiens brought home the same amount of food, but spilled a lot less blood and sweat to get it. Then there was likely an invisible pressure. Disease. We can't spot a virus on a fossil the way we can see a bone fracture. But when isolated populations meet newcomers, foreign pathogens become a silent weapon of mass destruction. 4. The collapse of isolated networks. But the final crack, the one that truly broke the empire, was social. Neanderthals weren't antisocial, but their world was built on much smaller, far more fragile networks. They huddled together in isolated family groups deep in the valleys. When a brutal winter wiped out their food supply, they were entirely on their own. No backup. No rescue. Shrinking populations led straight to catastrophic inbreeding. Sapiens, on the other hand, they built complex trade networks, connecting countless tribes across massive geographical areas. When famine hit, they could call on their neighbors for help. Sapiens didn't survive because the individual was stronger. We survived because our network was stronger. Neanderthals didn't lose because they were weak or stupid. They fell to a ruthless storm of climate chaos, fierce competition, and ultimate isolation. Group by group, these compassionate giants quietly faded into the freezing fog of history, leaving the planet to the physically weaker but far better connected underdogs. But here's the crazy part. They never actually left. If your ancestry traces back to anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, odds are you're walking around with 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA right now. Because our sapiens ancestors didn't just compete with them, somewhere in the dark corners of prehistory, these two species met. They coexisted, and they interbred. They aren't monsters. They aren't some dumb caveman punchline. They live on inside our biology as genetic memories woven right into the survival story of humanity. The Neanderthals might have lost the planet, but they never truly went away. Their story leaves us with a harsh truth. Evolution doesn't just crown the biggest, strongest body. It rewards the most adaptable network. Humanity's greatest superpower was never raw, isolated muscle. It was our ability to connect, to lean on each other when the brutal winters rolled in. So let's play a quick what if before we go. What if 50,000 years ago, Mother Nature didn't flip the script? What if those deep, dense forests never died off and Neanderthals kept their absolute ambush advantage? Would our lanky, fragile ancestors have stood a chance? Or would we be the dusty skeletons sitting silently in their museums? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.